Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of a small clearing just beyond the capital's bustle. The morning air was thick with dust and promise. All around him, the world felt tense. Months of news reports spoke of distant villages caught in sudden raids, families fleeing before dawn, fields left untended. The president's heart ached at each story. He had taken power to protect his people, yet the usual plans failed again and again. He needed something new, something bold. Mind turned over one idea and held it tight. A light infantry unit made up entirely of women. He summoned Colonel Selefu to his office the very next day. Selefu was a calm man with sharp eyes and a steady voice. He reported on supply lines and troop morale, but Traoré cut to the chase. We must build a force that moves quietly. He said, a force that surprises our enemies and brings hope to our people. Selefu frowned. Sir, women in combat? Our officers will doubt the plan. Traoré only smiled. Our enemies did not see strength in them. That is why we will use it. Plans took shape on a worn map table. Traoré traced lines through the Sahel region with his finger. Recruit in Bobo, Dulaso Dori, Tanko Dogo, he said. Find women who know these lands, women who carry the memory of loss and the will to protect. Selefu noted rivers and rough roads. He listed villages at risk. He sketched a route for a hidden training camp near Kudugu, far from prying eyes. They agreed that the unit would be light and fast. No heavy equipment, no large convoys, just skills, courage, and unity. Words slipped out like sand through fingers. At first it was a rumor, soldiers courting women for secret missions. Then it grew louder. Mothers whispered at market stalls. Children pointed at passing vehicles with covered cargo. In dusty towns, farmers paused from their work to gossip in the shade of mango trees. Mariam, a widow from P, heard the talk and felt a spark in her chest. Aissatou, a teacher in Wahiguya, closed her classroom door and asked herself what she could give to her country. Young Selu debated leaving university lectures to join something bigger than her books. Not everyone welcomed the idea. Some generals muttered in their corners. They saw only risk. They spoke of tradition and the need for proven methods. Warned of distraction and drama, Traoré invited each skeptic to his office. He listened to their doubts with respect. Then he shared stories of women who had defended homes in earlier struggles. He spoke of mothers who guided children through dark times. He reminded them that courage did not wear a uniform and strength did not depend on gender. One by one, the doubters grew quiet. Meanwhile, Traoré's own journey shaped his faith. In this plan, he remembered his childhood in the north of the country. His mother had risen before dawn to prepare food for the family. His sister had carried water through hot sands to thirsty neighbors. He recalled the day his father fell in a clash along the border. It was his mother and sister who carried him home through rough ground. From those memories he drew the raw power that lived in the hearts of women. He believed this power could help heal a fractured land. Colonel Selefu met with a small team of trusted officers to sketch training details. They chose Major Aja, one of the few senior women in the army, to lead the effort. Aja's calm strength and clear orders inspired respect. She set rules. Every recruit must know how to read a map and care for basic wounds. Each must learn to move with silence through tall grass. She added lessons on local dialects so they could blend in when needed. The goal was to build fighters who could disappear into a crowd or vanish in the night. Recruiters fanned out across villages near national parks and border posts. They spoke with community leaders under neem trees while goats milled nearby. In some places, women stood by quietly, arms crossed. Others' families offered blessings. Mariam signed up after remembering how she came home from planting peanuts to see her small farm in flames. Aissatou gripped the recruiter's hand and spoke of protecting children from fear. Selu hesitated at first. Her dreams were in the books she carried, but then she felt a call stronger than college lectures. One by one, they stepped forward. By late spring, more than 300 women gathered at the hidden camp near Kudugu. They arrived in old trucks and dusty buses, carrying only what they could hold: a few clothes, a cherished family photo, and hope. The camp lay against a background of scrubland and thorn bushes. Barracks rose from red soil. Fences kept out wandering, livestock and curious eyes. At night, fireflies danced among the tents. In the silence, the new recruits heard only the cries of birds and the rush of wind. In the first days, Major Adja organized simple drills. She taught them how to stand still for long hours, observing and listening. She showed them how to hold their rifles so the weight felt part of their body. At dawn, they lined up under a pale sky, backs straight. Traoré himself visited once, watching them move as one when he called out a command. He nodded with satisfaction. These women learned quickly. They shared jokes as they ran, and they whispered encouragement when someone stumbled over the rough ground. Rumors of the camp began to fade under layers of silence. Soldiers from other units passed by without a second glance. Locals thought the site was old and empty. This was exactly what Traoré wanted. In the quiet training ground, less gazelles noirs, the black gazelles would grow. They would learn strength born from kindness. They would learn to protect not just with force, but with careful planning and respect for civilians. Above all, they would learn to move as sisters, bound by purpose and trust. Back in the capital, the map on Traoré's desk showed new symbols. Small circles marked the villages where recruits came from. Lines linked secret supply routes. Dots indicated potential targets for future operations. With each symbol, the president felt a surge of hope. This plan was more than military strategy. It was a promise that every citizen could defend home and family. It was a way to show that even in a land worn by conflict, new ideas could grow. And in that quiet room, Traoré let himself believe that change was possible. Recruiters set out before sunrise, moving in small groups on dusty paths that cut through farmland and scrubland. They rode in old pickup trucks, their engines sputtering as they turned toward villages that lay beyond the reach of paved roads. In each place, they met under the shade of large trees, baobabs and nimware. Elders gathered on low benches, and children peered from doorways. The recruiters spoke quietly, but with firm purpose. The president himself wanted to invite willing women to join a special force. Some villagers stared in disbelief. Others whispered among themselves, curious and cautious. In the market square of Bobo Dioulasso, stalls brimmed with peanuts, corn, and fresh vegetables. Women bent over scales, weighing goods, their hands steady from years of practice. One recruiter approached Miriam, who balanced a sack of peanuts. On her bicycle, Miriam paused, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Madam," the recruiter said softly, "the president asks for women who know this land and its people, women who will protect their homes." Memories flooded back, the night her husband did not return from patrol, the charred fields left behind. She thought of her children sleeping alone. Without saying a word, she nodded. Farther north, in the dusty town of Dori, Isotu closed the door of her empty classroom and listened as two recruiters spoke with the headmaster outside. She had watched too many children flee when armed men attacked nearby villages. She cleaned boards and swept floors, but her heart longed to do more. When the recruiters finished their talk, she slipped out and joined them under an old black acacia. The headmaster watched her go with a proud nod. Isotu felt a thrill of fear and excitement. She left behind her chalk and books, trading lessons for a new path. In Wahiguya, Selu sat on a bench outside the university gates, her student ID in one hand, a notebook in the other. She and her classmates had talked of exams, lectures, and future careers. But the world had shifted. Every day brought news of attacks on nearby communities. At lunch, she saw the recruiters step out of a khaki-painted truck carrying rifles and tents. Selu closed her notebook and followed them through narrow alleys. She remembered her sister's tearful face when she spoke of joining. Still, Selu felt a pull stronger than any buka call to stand for something bigger than herself. Each recruit faced a moment of doubt. Villagers asked why they would leave family and comfort for unknown trials. Husbands frowned. Mothers pressed hands against foreheads in prayer. Fathers warned of danger, yet the women held fast. They knew the risk, yet felt that serving their country meant more than staying safe. Miriam kissed her children through tears and climbed into the back of a truck. Isatu gathered pens and notebooks into a small bundle before joining the convoy. Ruth slipped her phone into her pocket, wrote a quick message to her friends, and walked toward her new life. Along the way, the landscape shifted. Fields of millet gave way to scrubland. Villages appeared and disappeared like mirages. Mothers guided goats across dusty roads. Children waved from fences. Women carrying water jugs balanced them on their heads with practiced ease. Recruiters spoke kindly with villagers, explaining that no one needed to fear them. They came in peace, seeking volunteers for a new force that would protect everyone. In some places, villagers offered bowls of porridge or fresh water. In others, they watched quietly, unsure what to make of the idea. By late afternoon, the convoy reached the hidden camp near Koutagu. About 30 trucks and vans rumbled in, throwing red dust into the air. The camp lay in a shallow valley, surrounded by low hills dotted with thorn bushes. Makeshift barracks rose from the earth-simple wooden frames with canvas sheets for walls. Supply tents stood in neat rows. Tall fence made of metal poles and barbed wire marked the boundary, though most locals did not know what lay inside. Women climbed out of vehicles, stretching stiff limbs and blinking against the sun. Miriam ran her hand over her uniform the first time she wore it and took a steadying breath. Isatu smoothed the folds of her trousers, her mind racing with questions about what would come next. Selu looked around with wide eyes, absorbing every detail. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot, flap of canvas in the breeze, the hum of conversation as recruits greeted one another. In the center of the camp, Major Aja waited. She stood, tall in her own uniform, a calm smile welcoming each woman. Round her, other trainers moved with purpose, checking supplies, arranging equipment, and preparing the ground for the first meeting. Major Aja spoke firmly but warmly, her voice carrying. Over the clatter of boots and gear, "Welcome," she said. "You have taken the first step by being here. Now we will learn together how to protect our families and our land." That evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, the recruits gathered in a circle under the flicker of oil lanterns. They sat on their heels, back straight, and introduced themselves one by one. Miriam spoke first, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger as she recalled why she came. Isatu spoke next, her eyes shining with determination. Selu followed, her tone calm, though her heart raced. One by one, each woman shared her story: loss, hope, desire to serve. In the soft glow of lantern light, they saw reflections of their own courage in others' eyes. In the days that followed, the camp came alive with activity. Dawn trumpets called them to stand in neat ranks for morning roll call. Recruits cleaned their uniforms, polished their boots, and checked their rifles. They learned basic drills: how to stand at attention, how to salute, how to march as one body. In the afternoons, they walked through the bush, learning to read land features and follow footprints. They carried heavy packs filled with water and supplies, testing their strength and willpower. Meals became moments of friendship. The women sat together under a simple shelter, passing bowls of rice and stew, exchanging laughter and stories. They shared dreams. Miriam spoke of returning home to see her children grow. Soda wished to start a school for displaced children. Tilu imagined using her college education to rebuild what war had broken. In those moments, they felt not just as recruits, but as sisters, standing side by side. As the sun set each day, the camp grew still, except for the soft voices of the women. They practiced first aid techniques, learning to dress wounds with bandages and clean water. They studied simple maps, tracing routes to nearby villages. They held one another up when someone felt weak, offering a firm hand or a kind word. Major Aja walked among them, her watchful eyes noting their progress, her gentle words building confidence. 1 week into training, a sudden storm lashed the camp. Rain fell in sheets, turning hard ground into mud. Tents sagged under the weight of water. Yet the recruits sprang into action. They helped one another tie tarps, secure equipment, and carry supplies to higher ground. They laughed as they slipped in the mud, splashing one another and making jokes to keep spirits high. Miriam slipped and landed softly on a burlap sack, only to be helped up by Isatu, who wore a grin that brightened the gray day. Selu handed out fresh water from a leaking barrel and called out encouragement. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind shining leaves and a scent of wet earth. Women shook out tents, wrung out blankets, and lit fires to dry clothes. Clear air, they saw a rainbow arch, across the sky a quiet sign of promise. They gathered again in the circle, sharing how the storm had tested them and reminded them of the power of unity. Major Aja joined them, pointing out that in both war and life, storms would come, but together they could stand strong. Into weeks, and the camp buzzed with purpose. Letters arrived from families, full of pride and worry. The women read them aloud, comforting those who missed home. They practiced drills with loaded weapons, learning to move swiftly and quietly. At the sound of a whistle, they navigated obstacle courses, crawled through tunnels of brush, and learned to speak in hushed tones over radios. Every skill built on the last, shaping them into a force unlike any Burkina Faso had known before. In the heart of the camp, friendships deepened. Mariam, Aissatou, and Silu formed a small group. At night, they shared starlit conversations about childhood memories, dancing at village festivals, running barefoot through fields, learning to weave baskets, smiled at jokes, teased each other gently, and promised to watch each other's backs in every mission to come. Other small circles formed, weaving a tapestry of unity that crossed every difference. By the time training neared its first milestone, each recruit carried herself with a new sense of purpose. Their eyes shone with confidence. Their steps fell in time with one another. They knew that soon they would leave the camp and move into the world they sought to protect. Yet in that hidden valley, they felt a quiet power grow born of shared hardship, respect, and hope. In simple uniforms and with rifles slung over shoulders, these women prepared not only for battle, but for a future where their courage would light the way for their nation. The morning sun rose over the camp like a promise. The women stood in rows on the hard earth, their eyes bright with purpose. Major Aja walked slowly along the line, her boots crunching on the gravel, while she wore a calm look, but inside she felt excitement. Today would be the first real test of their skills. The air smelled of dust and sweat and hope. Each recruit held her rifle with care, the wooden stock warm against her cheek. As the major stepped forward, the women straightened their backs and raised their chins. They were no longer just villagers, teachers, or students. They were becoming soldiers. Major Aja spoke in a clear voice that carried across the rows. She reminded them of the hour's plan, a forced march with full packs, a weapons handling drill, and then a silent movement exercise in the scrubland beyond the fence. The recruits listened with fierce attention. Mariam tightened the straps on her pack and felt its weight settle on her shoulders. Aissatou adjusted the sling of her rifle and breathed deeply, her heart steady. Silu checked the map in her hand and set it into a clear plastic sleeve. All around them, voices were hushed with concentration. The march began with slow, even steps. The group moved out of the camp gates and onto a dry path that wound through low hills. At first, the pace was gentle, giving everyone a chance to find her stride. But soon, Major Aja called out, "Faster." The women quickened their steps until their legs burned and sweat pooled on their foreheads. They passed dusty bushes and thorny shrubs, their boots kicking up puffs of red earth. Mariam felt her lungs tighten with each breath, but she held her head high. Aissatou counted her steps in her mind, using the rhythm to calm herself. Sutu kept her eyes on the horizon, reminding herself of why she had come. After 3 kilometers, Major Aja halted the march. She pointed to a line of fallen logs and shrubs laid across the path. "Obstacle course," she said. "Move over, under, and through without dropping your pack." The recruits grinned at one another. They climbed over logs, ducked under branches, and squeezed through narrow gaps. When one stumbled, another reached out a hand to help. Laughter rippled through the group as Mariam tangled her feet and fell into a patch of soft grass. Aissatou paused to steady her, and together they rose again, their smiles matching the bright sky above. Next came weapons handling. The women formed small circles around wooden tables where rifles lay laid out with care. Major Aja watched closely as each recruit picked up her rifle and learned to strip it down, clean it, and reassemble it. The pieces clicked together in their hands like puzzle parts. Mariam's fingers shook at first, but steady confidence grew with each movement. Aissatou followed every instruction to the letter, her calm manner a source of comfort to others. Selou found delight in the small precision of cleaning the barrel, shining metal against cloth. By the end, each rifle gleamed, and the recruits felt a new sense of mastery. The afternoon sun pressed down as they shifted to map reading. Under the shade of a lone acacia tree, Major Aja spread a large map across a makeshift table. She pointed. 2 symbols for rivers, roads, and villages. She taught them how to find north using the sun, how to measure distance with a ruler, and how to read contour lines for hills. The recruits bent over the paper, tracing paths with their fingers. Miriam's brow furrowed as she worked out a route. Aissatou whispered the steps to herself. Selou compared her notes to the dotted lines on the map. When a recruit found a mistake, others cheered her on. The lesson became a team effort. As the evening approached, they practiced survival skills. In small groups, they learned to dig shallow wells, filter muddy water through layers of cloth and sand, and start a fire without matches. The day's heat made their shirts cling to their backs as they knelt by the earth. Miriam ran her hands through damp sand, watching it drip clear into her canteen. Aissatou rubbed 2 sticks together until smoke curled into the air. Selou gathered dry twigs to feed the small flame. When the fire caught, a cheer rose, and the women shared pieces of flatbread warmed on the embers. In that simple meal by firelight, they tasted their own strength. Night drills were silent and tense. Each group slipped into the bush with only moonlight to guide them. They moved on hands and knees past small ridges, listening for the faintest sound. Major Ajaya's voice came through a radio in their pack, low and steady, guiding them past imaginary enemy positions. Miriam felt her heart pound as she crawled through tall grass that brushed her face. Aissatou counted steps to a hidden marker and led her group back without a word. Selou held her ground at a crossroads, then motioned the others forward with a flat hand. When they returned to camp, the women stood in silence, proud that not a whisper had escaped them. Trust exercises followed. Major Aja paired recruits and blindfolded one of each pair. The sighted partner guided the other over rocks and roots with gentle words. At first, Miriam froze, afraid of the unknown. Aissatou's firm voice soothed her as she stepped carefully. Selou felt the rough bark under her hand, trusting the voice that led her. When the blindfolded partner completed the course, they switched roles. Laughter rang out as some stumbled, and cheer rose when they reached the end. The exercise taught them that courage came from trusting each other as much as themselves, but not every moment was easy. Friction flared between recruits from different regions. Old rivalries surfaced when lines were drawn in drills or when groups argued over tasks. Tensions rose like heat on the desert plain. Major Aja called the whole unit together under the night sky and began a circle talk. Each woman spoke honestly about her worries and fears. Miriam said she feared failure. Aissatou admitted she worried she would let others down. Selou confessed she missed the quiet halls of her university. As each voice joined in the circle, grew calm. When one woman finished, another placed a hand gently on her shoulder. By the end, they sang a soft song they had learned as girls, its tune weaving them closer. One day, the training climaxed in a full-scale simulation. The camp became an enemy outpost. The women split into 2 teams. One defended makeshift bunkers of sandbags. The other launched a silent night raid to capture the flag. Under the watchful eyes of trainers, they moved with stealth and speed. Miriam led her group through a shallow gully, her heart racing as she crept past the bunkers. Aissatou spoke into her radio to signal her teammates. Selou cut the wire. Alarm with wire cutters. Shouts and laughter filled the night when the flag fell. The trainers cheered as the units swapped roles and tested one another's courage as the simulation ended, as the camp fell quiet under a blanket of stars. The women gathered at the crest of a hill overlooking the barracks. They looked at one another with new eyes. Scarves of sweat marked their faces. Bodies ached, but hearts swelled with pride. In that moment, they were no longer simply recruits. They were sisters in arms, les gazelles noires ready to move together through darkness and dawn. Each had faced fear and found strength. Each had learned to trust the other's hand, and each believed that, together, they could face whatever lay beyond the fence. In the days that followed, their bond became the true heart of the unit. They shared stories by the fire, comforted one another after long drills, and celebrated small victories with quiet claps and wide smiles. Mariam discovered that her anger at loss could become fuel for courage. Aissatou realized that her calm mind could guide others in chaos. Selou found that her love of learning could bring fresh ideas to old problems. More than weapons or maps, they carried a trust that would carry them through every mission to come. At the end of Part 3, the camp settled into a new rhythm. Dawn drills, midday lessons, night exercises all flowed into one another like the seasons. The women moved as one living force. In each step, they carried the memory of home and the promise of a safer future. Their rifles lay ready, their packs packed, and their spirits steeled. Under Major Adja's watch, they had forged steel in their bodies and sisterhood in their hearts. Now they stood on the edge of the next challenge, confident that no force could break the silent bonds they had built. The night air was cool and still as les gazelles noires gathered at the edge of camp. Lanterns hung from poles, casting soft pools of light on the women's faces. Each held her rifle close, the metal weight familiar now, like part of her own arm. Major Adja moved among them, checking straps and giving quiet words of encouragement. Mariam's heart thumped in her chest as she fastened the last buckle on her combat vest. Aissatou knelt to adjust her headscarf so it would hide her hair and keep the moon from catching her face. Selou patted her map case one last time, making sure it was secure. No one spoke much. There was too much to feel, too much to remember. The months of hard training, the friendships that had grown like roots, the promise they carried for a safer home. At a whispered signal, the unit slipped into the waiting trucks. The engines rumbled, tired from miles on dusty roads, but they moved without complaint. Women pressed close in the back shoulder to shoulder breathing quietly, so no one would hear from outside. Mariam glanced at Selou and gave her a small, tense smile. Aissatou nodded once, as if to say, "We can do this." The convoy wound away. From camp, headlights off, guided only by Major Adja and a lone driver skilled in night navigation. The land rolled past as black shapes, thorn bushes, low hills, silent termites mounds. Every so often a moonbeam slipped through clouds to pick out a baobab's heavy trunk or a field left fallow. The world felt secret and possible. After an hour, the trucks pulled into a shallow, dry riverbed. The women climbed out carefully, weapons already in hand. The convoy dispersed into small groups of 10, each led by a squad commander. Mariam joined Aissatou's group. Selou went with another, radio strapped across her back, and left the trucks behind, hiding them under branches and leaves. Each woman checked her rifle's safety, her spare magazines, her knife tied to her boot. Major Age's voice came through the radio, low but clear. "Remember the plan? Move quietly, no alarm. Civilian safety first. Stick to your sectors, Godspeed, then silence." They spread into the night like shadows. The target lay beyond. A small cluster of huts, a jihadist arms depot near Silenzo, where whispered reports said heavy weapons were stored. The depot stood at the edge of a grove of mango trees, surrounded by low walls of corrugated metal.
Ow.
2 sentries paced along, the fence talking in hushed tones. Mariam's group crawled through grass, faces and hands brushing dew. Aissatou whispered, "Follow my lead," and slipped out of the grass to a gap under the fence. She closed it behind them, careful not to make a sound. Mariam's heart pounded as she slipped through, one foot then the other. Beyond the fence, the depot looked small under the moon, but its danger felt large. Using local phrases and quiet voices, Aissatou and Mariam posed as village scouts sent to check on supplies. The jihadist drivers eyed them suspiciously, but when Aissatou spoke in the exact accent of the region, they relaxed and waved them toward the entrance. Miriam held her breath. They moved with purpose, not too quickly, carrying forged documents. That looked as real as anything. Inside, crates of rifles and boxes of ammunition lined the walls, and motorcycles stood ready for quick raids. Miriam's stomach clenched. This was the moment they had trained for. At her signal, Isatu slipped a small device from her pocket-tan explosive charge designed to disable engines and break wooden crates. Miriam and two others crept past sleeping guards and fixed charges on the motorcycle's fuel tanks. The recruits worked with calm hands, wires, and timers that clicked softly in the dark. Salu's team, a few yards away, did the same along the depot's outer wall, planting charges to cut through locks and steel plates. Every movement was a testament to their months of practice under Major Aja's watch. Suddenly, a guard shifted. In his sleep, his foot scraped the floor and he opened his eyes with a start. Before he could shout, Miriam's partner raised a silenced pistol and fired one shot. The guard went down without a cry. Miriam's breath caught in her throat, but she forced it out slowly. Isatu touched her arm, a reminder that they had a job to finish. They crouched behind crates as tiny pops signaled that the charges were going off. Engines died in sudden coughs of flame and smoke. Line of ammunition crates split open, sending bullets rolling on the ground like metal rain. Alarm bells began to clang. Red lights flashed on the depot's control panel. Voices shouted in alarm. Forced into action, the women moved with trained speed. Salu's group covered their retreat, firing warning shots into the air to keep other fighters from closing in. Miriam grabbed Isato's hand and dashed toward the fence. A bullet whizzed past Miriam's ear, kicking up dust at her feet. Isatu pushed her forward, then felt pain erupt in her side. Miriam stumbled as Isatu fell to one knee, pressing a hand to a dark stain spreading on her tunic. "Keep going," Isatu gasped, her eyes fierce with pain. Miriam dropped beside her, but Isatu shook her head. "You know what to do," she said, voice faint but steady. Miriam's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to stand. Another burst of gunfire rang out, and Salu's voice broke through the crackle in Miriam's radio. "We have your back. Get her out." Miriam crouched and whispered, "Thank you," though Isatu barely heard. With a last look of trust, Miriam raced on, slipping through the fence while stray bullets stitched the night air. Outside, trucks waited under a tall acacia tree. In the back, commanders searched for any recruits left behind. Miriam hurled herself into the bed of a truck and gasped for breath as the vehicle roared away. Through the front window, she saw Salu's headlights cutting a path through the dark. The convoy sped toward camp, lights off again, urgency pushing their engines. Miriam watched the moon slide past, each moment stretching like a pulse. She pressed her hand to Isato's wound, wrapping her fingers around the fabric to feel if she was still breathing. When they reached the hidden clinic at camp, medics rushed out, shining lamps and lifting Isato onto a stretcher. Knelt beside her, voice trembling as she called out her name. Asuto opened her eyes and smiled, though a tear slipped down her cheek. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." Miriam reached over, hand in hand, sealing a promise between them. In that bright tent, the danger felt far away, replaced by hope and relief. By dawn, the women gathered in the central hall for a quiet debrief. Major Aja stood before them, her face both proud and solemn. She spoke of courage and sacrifice, of how they had struck a blow against those who terrorized villages. She praised Miriam's speed, Salu's cover fire, and Isato's calm under fire. The room filled with soft applause, tears, and shared glances that spoke more than words. The mission had succeeded. Key weapons were destroyed and the depot lay silent. But they also carried await the knowledge that war bore real costs, and that each action rippled through lives. In the glow of morning light, news arrived from intel officers. Local contacts had learned of the depot raid and rescued 20 school children who had been kept nearby as hostages. The schools were reopened, children returned to families, and peace settled over villages that once trembled at the mention of jihadist patrols. As word spread, cheers rose in distant hamlets. Parents wept with joy for their missing children. Traders in market squares told stories of women soldiers who, moved like ghosts and saved the day. Back at camp, Les Gazelles Noirs gathered under the tall fence. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and renewal. Miriam looked at Isato's bandaged form, then at her sisters in arms all tired, some hurt, but all alive. Salou stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You showed them who we are," Salou said softly. Miriam nodded, voice catching, "And who we will always be." In that moment, the unit felt complete. They had moved as one, faced danger together, and proven their promise. Their rifles rested on their shoulders, silent now, but their hearts thundered with the power they had unleashed. The sun climbed over the scrubland. Major Adja addressed them once more. "Today, you struck fear into those who thrive on it. You showed every woman, child, and man in Burkina Faso that help can come in the still of night, carried on silent feet and brave hearts. Rest now. Tomorrow, the work continues." And with that, Les Gazelles Noirs found strength not just in victory, but in each other, ready to write the next chapter in their untold power. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft pink as Les Gazelles Noirs stood together at the camp's edge. They had returned from their first field mission, and the air buzzed with quiet excitement. In the soft glow, Major Adja walked among them, her eyes misty with pride. The women touched one another's shoulders, exchanged tired but bright smiles, and felt a deep calm wash over their hard-earned strength. Miriam wrapped her arm around Isato's shoulder, careful of the bandage still fresh against her. Side Isatou winced but smiled, her bright eyes telling Miriam she would be fine soon. Selou leaned against a low fence post, map case tucked under her arm, and breathed in the scent of wet earth and grass. The night's victory seemed to reach far beyond the depot they had raided. It reached into every village they had trained to protect. In the camp's main tent, a simple table held bowls of steaming porridge and cups of sweet tea. Women filled their plates and sat cross-legged on woven mats. Laughter and soft chatter rising around the warmth of the lanterns. Each spoonful tasted of comfort and relief, as if every grain had absorbed the promise of safety. Miriam took a slow bite, savoring the creamy rice, and closed her eyes. She thought of her children sleeping soundly at home, now safe because of what they had done. Isatou sat beside her and spoke in a low voice about the smiles she imagined on the children's faces when they heard the news of their rescue. Salou joined in, adding how she pictured the old school teacher who would sweep the yard and raise his hands in thanks. In those moments, the mission felt more than strategy or tactics. It felt like hope made real. By mid-morning, word of their success spread through the camp and into the wider world. Radio broadcasts in Ouagadougou spoke of a daring raid that freed hostages and silenced a terror cell. Journalists arrived in convoy, eyes bright with curiosity and pens, ready to capture every detail. Major Adja met them under a tall she tree, flanked by her gazelles, each in crisp uniform that carried patches of mud and sweat from the night's work. A microphone passed from one reporter to another as Miriam and Isatou described how they moved like shadows, how their training had turned fear into fuel. They spoke of sisters in arms, of the trust that bound them when danger was near. Selou added how every woman had a reason to fight lost love, duty, and how those reasons gave them strength stronger than any rifle. The press cameras clicked and flashed, but the women kept their eyes steady and their voices calm. They spoke in simple words so everyone could understand. They said they were ordinary women called to do an extraordinary thing. When the journalists asked about the future, Major Adja answered that this was just the start. "We will train more sisters," she said, voice firm. "We will stand guard in every province, protect every home." The reporters nodded, scribbling notes as though writing the first lines of history. And in that moment, Les Gazelles Noirs felt their burden grow lighter and their promise grow larger at once. That afternoon, supplies arrived from the capital. New uniforms, fresh rations, and letters from President Traoré himself. He sent words of thanks, calling them the silent shield of our nation and promising more support for their work. A small flag with his seal fluttered on a wall of the mess tent. Miriam read the letter aloud as the women gathered around. They heard how their actions had lifted the spirits of people across Burkina Faso. They heard how the president believed that when women stood in defense of their land, every heart could stand taller. When Miriam finished, hands pressed against chests, silent tears fell. Isoto reached out and pressed Miriam's hand, and Selu touched the flag, each gesture a vow that they would keep moving forward. In the days that followed, the camp took on new life. Local artisans arrived with fresh baskets, cloth, and beads, offering gifts of thanks. Mothers brought fresh vegetables from nearby markets. Children shyly waved as the women passed by, and elders bowed in silent respect. Each gift was a silent promise that the villages they served stood beside them. The recruits wore these tokens proudly: a beaded necklace, a woven mat, a small clay pot. On evening walks, they fastened the gifts to their belts, sharing stories of the hands that made them. In every step, they felt a deeper connection to the land and its people. Training continued, but with a new rhythm. Dawn drills still tested their bodies, and map reading still sharpened their minds. Yet between exercises, they paused to teach local women first aid and fire starting, skills once reserved for soldiers alone. They invited village elders to practice night watches, to learn patrol routes and basic signals. Slowly, the idea of defense grew beyond the gazelles themselves, became a shared mission across communities. Mothers learned to check fields for hidden dangers. Teachers learned to show children safe paths home. In that way, the force that Traoré began took root in every heart, small and large. 1 week after the mission, President Traoré came in person to the camp. He arrived in a convoy that rolled through the morning fog, soldiers standing at attention as he stepped from his vehicle. Les Gazelles Noirs formed 2 lines, rifles, saluting, faces shining with pride. The president walked slowly down the line, stopping to shake hands and offer quiet words of thanks. When he reached Major Aja, he embraced her and said, "You have taught my army a lesson that courage is not measured by gender, but by purpose." Then he turned to the women and said, "You have shown our nation what it means to stand for each other." His voice broke as he spoke, and many recruits felt tears slip down their cheeks. For Miriam, Isatou, and Selu, this moment became a memory they would carry always. After the ceremony, the president sat under a canvas tent with a handful of villagers and gazelles. He listened as Miriam described her children's laughter when she returned home. He heard from Isatou how she dreamed of reopening her school. Free from fear, he learned of Selu's plan to start a local health clinic once the fighting ended. Traoré nodded at each story, promising to help them reach those dreams. He spoke of new schools, medical clinics, and farms that would receive support once peace spread. In that circle, power felt gentless, shared promise between leader and people, bound by hope. As the sun set on that day, the women gathered one last time around a small fire near the fence. They formed a tight circle, hands joined. Without a word, each closed her eyes and placed her head on the shoulder of the next. They remembered the months of hardship, the sting of sweat and dust, the sound of gunfire overhead. They remembered the first time Miriam stepped into the clearing as a recruit, uncertain and scared. They remembered Isatou's calm under fire, Selu's plan that led them through obstacles, and the night they found they could trust each other with their lives. In the hush, they felt a quiet promise that no matter what lay ahead, they would stand together. When the stars filled the sky, Major Aja spoke softly. She said that transformation doesn't happen in a day. It happens in moments where one hand reaches out to voices speak in unison and a shared dream takes shape. She said that Les Gazelles Noirs had become more than a military unit. They had become the living heart of their nation's hope. In the flicker of firelight, the women opened their eyes and saw one another anew. They saw not just fighters but builders of peace. They saw not just a silent force, but a chorus of bravery that would echo from the Sahel to the cities.
Ow.
Following weeks, as the gazelles rotated between missions and rest, they heard of new recruits stepping forward. Mothers, teachers, students, many answered the call to stand guard. The unit doubled in size, then tripled, as communities sent their daughters and sisters to train. In homes once ruled by fear, children now pointed at uniforms in pride. Villagers, marched alongside gazelles in exercises, learning the steps of night patrols in silent movement. The spark that began with 500 recruits grew into a flame that warmed every heart. Looking back on the journey, Miriam thought of her husband's memory, no longer a painful weight, but a quiet fuel for strength. Aissatou dreamed of a school where children no longer hid in fear, but learned under the shade of a mango tree. Salou planned a clinic where wounded would find care without shame. Each woman carried her own dream, and each dream became a shared banner. Together, they walked toward the future where courage lived in every home, where peace was not a word but a song, where the silent force of women guarded their land with gentle power. And so, as Part 5 closed its page, Les Gazelles Noires stood ready. Beneath the wide sky of Burkina Faso, they lifted their eyes to the horizon. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. They knew storms and raids would come again. Yet they also knew that together they carried a promise stronger than fear. In sturdy boots and quiet hearts, they walked forward. A living echo of hope and unity, a silent force whose power would speak across the land for years to come.